My business partner got my wife pregnant and tried to take my company. My mom said I should ignore it, raise the kid anyway. So I went nuclear and took everything back. All right, Reddit. I need you to strap in and grab your popcorn, because what you're about to hear is going to mess with your head. I'm Gavin, 40, male, living in coastal Georgia, and for the past 12 years I've been building a company called Tidewater Protective Coatings LLC out of a rented shop off Highway 25 near Garden City. The work is industrial coatings and corrosion control, and if that means nothing to you, just think about every steel structure within 50 miles of saltwater. Bridges, port cranes, storage tanks, water towers, ship components, pipeline supports. Every single one of them rusts, and every single one of them needs blasting, priming, and coating on a schedule or the whole thing starts falling apart. That's the business I built. To most people it sounds boring, but if you actually understand the industry, it's a gold mine. I understood it. I started the company when I was 28 with my best friend, Sheldon Pratt. Everyone calls him Shell. We go all the way back to middle school in Rincon. We played ball together, got in trouble together, and when we were 17 we spent summers working on the same shrimp boat out of Thunderbolt. That was the kind of history we had. When I married Karen, Shell stood beside me as my best man. And when he married his first wife, I stood beside him. That marriage lasted about 11 months before she cleaned out their joint account and ran off to Tallahassee with a bartender. When it happened, Shell was so wrecked he couldn't even think straight, so I drove down there with him just so we could get his dog back. Years earlier, when I was 22 and completely broke after a layoff, Shell let me crash on his couch for 3 months and never once asked me for $1. That was the kind of friendship we had. Or at least, that's the kind of friendship I believed we had. After his divorce, Shell stayed single, stayed hungry, and threw himself into the business right beside me. We split ownership straight down the middle, 50-50, 2 equal members of the LLC. I handled operations, estimating, client relationships, and managing the crews. Shell ran field production. He was excellent with his hands, knew the chemistry of coatings better than most engineers, and he could push a crew through a brutal 12-hour containment job in the middle of August heat without losing a single man. Karen came into the picture about 5 years after the company started. I met her at a Chamber of Commerce mixer in Savannah that I honestly didn't even want to attend. She was working administrative work for a trucking company on the west side of town. Sharp woman, organized, and very good with numbers. We dated for around 6 months, got married quietly at the courthouse, and only a few months after that she was running our office. That part wasn't actually my idea. It was Shell's. He pointed out that we were bleeding money paying a part-time bookkeeper who kept miscoding expenses and a temp worker who couldn't keep the filing straight. Karen could handle payroll, vendor management, invoice processing, bank reconciliations, reimbursements, and client billing all from one desk. According to him, we'd save $40,000 a year and get better work at the same time. He turned out to be right. Karen was excellent at the job. Within a year, she had the books tighter than they had ever been, our vendor relationships neatly organized, and our billing cycle shortened from net 45 to net 30 on most accounts. She set up the QuickBooks system, managed all the company credit cards, controlled the checking and savings accounts, processed payroll for our 15-man crew, and approved every purchase order that came through the office. In other words, she had the keys to the kingdom. Every financial door in that company could be opened by Karen without needing permission from me or Shell. And there's something important to understand about her. Karen wasn't some passive go-along-to-get-along type. She was sharp, the kind of sharp that could cut you if you weren't paying attention. She always seemed to know exactly what to say to make you feel like her idea had actually been yours all along. She knew when to push and when to pull back. When vendors tried to jack up prices, she'd negotiate them down with a quiet, firm tone that somehow made grown men apologize for wasting her time. When crew guys submitted sloppy timesheets, she'd send them back with corrections and give them a look that made sure it never happened again. I admired that about her. From the very beginning, Shell and Karen got along well too. At the time, it seemed perfectly natural. He'd stop by the office to grab work orders, and the two of them would chat about scheduling or crack a few jokes, just normal small business stuff where everyone works close together and shares the same space. Eventually, he started coming to dinner at our house every Saturday night. When football season rolled around, Sundays became part of the routine too. My wife, my best friend, my business partner, all sitting around my table eating shrimp and grits, talking about the week and watching the games. Back then I thought that was a good life. I honestly believed everything was solid. The business, the marriage, the friendship. I was wrong. For about 3 years after Karen took over the office, everything ran smoothly on the surface. Revenue climbed from $1.8 million to just over $3 million. We landed a recurring maintenance contract with the Georgia Ports Authority to maintain 2 container crane systems at the Garden City terminal. We picked up bridge work for the county, got approved vendor status with 3 regional chemical plants, bought a second spray rig, a new blast pot, and a containment trailer, and hired 4 more guys for the crew. I was proud of what we built. In a town where most people my age were still working for someone else or had already washed out, I had managed to build something real. Karen and I bought a house in Isle of Hope. Nothing fancy at all, just a 3-bedroom ranch sitting on a half-acre lot with a little dock that looked out over the marsh. Quiet place. Peaceful. Shell lived about 10 minutes away in a duplex he'd been renting ever since his divorce. Back then, everything in my life felt solid. The business was solid. The marriage was solid. The friendship was solid. At least that's what I believed. Then the numbers stopped adding up. It started with a blast media invoice. In our line of work, we use steel grit and garnet for most of our abrasive blasting jobs. We buy it in bulk, usually 40 to 60 tons at a time, depending on how heavy the project load is. For years, I only tracked the material costs loosely because Karen handled purchasing and I trusted her numbers. That was just how our system worked. But one day in March, a vendor rep named Dale from our garnet supplier called me directly. He said he wanted to thank me for the increased volume and ask if we were interested in negotiating a tiered discount. Increased volume. That didn't make sense. We hadn't increased volume. If anything, the first quarter had actually been lighter than normal because 2 bridge jobs had been pushed back to April due to permit issues. After that call, I pulled the purchase orders. Karen had been ordering garnet at roughly double our actual consumption rate for the past 7 months. The invoices themselves were real. The vendor was real. The deliveries were logged. But the quantities didn't match what our crews were actually using on real jobs. So I checked the delivery addresses. Half of the shipments went to our shop. The other half were being delivered to a storage yard in Pooler that I had never heard of before. The following Sunday, I drove out there myself. Industrial area off Pooler Parkway. Chain link fence. Gravel lot. A couple of shipping containers sitting near the back. I walked around the place and found 6 pallets of bagged garnet stacked under a tarp, each bag stamped with our vendor's lot numbers on the packaging. Whoever was behind it had been diverting our material there and selling it to smaller contractors at a markup. I took pictures of everything. The lot, the pallets, the lot numbers, the address posted on the gate. Then I drove home and said absolutely nothing to anyone. That was the first crack. But I didn't say a word. Not to Karen. Not to Shell. Years of running a business teaches you one important lesson. The worst thing you can do when you suspect a problem is announce that you suspect a problem. You watch. You stay quiet. You wait until you have enough information to act decisively. Over the next 3 weeks, I went through every vendor file Karen managed. I did it at night after she went to sleep, sitting at the shared office computer and copying invoices and statements onto a thumb drive. What I found wasn't sloppy. It was methodical. A company called Low Country Equipment Solutions had been billing us for containment scaffolding rentals on projects where we already owned our own containment gear. 7 invoices over 7 months, totaling just over $48,000. The company had a website, a phone number, and a P.O. box in Pooler. I called the number using a burner app on my phone. Nobody answered. Then I checked the Georgia Secretary of State's business filings online. Low Country Equipment Solutions had been registered only 8 months earlier. The registered agent listed was a name I didn't recognize. Key Bronton. So I searched the name. Nothing. No online presence, no records I could find. Dead end. Then I searched the P.O. box number. That same box number showed up on the garnet overflow shipments. That's when my stomach dropped. Not because I'd caught a thief. because I realized the thief had to be someone I trusted completely. And at that moment, I still didn't know which one it was. 2 days after I discovered the P.O. box connection, Karen came into the house carrying a manila folder. She said our liability insurance carrier needed updated documentation and that she needed me to sign a revised operating agreement that would streamline our banking authorizations. She made it sound like routine housekeeping. I opened the folder. The revised agreement gave Karen sole signatory authority over the company's primary checking and savings accounts, removing the current requirement for a member co-signature on withdrawals above a certain threshold. It also changed the buyout clause in the operating agreement. The old version required mutual consent for a forced sale. The new version replaced that with a provision allowing either member to trigger a buyout if there was a finding of material breach. In practical terms, that meant if someone could build a paper trail showing I'd violated some duty, whether real or completely fabricated, either one of them could force me to sell my share of the company at whatever valuation they controlled. And with Karen running the books, controlling that valuation wouldn't be hard. I read every page slowly. Karen watched me the whole time, leaning against the kitchen counter with that calm, patient expression she used whenever she wanted you to feel like you were overthinking something simple. The insurance guy needs it by Friday, she said. I closed the folder and told her I'd have my own guy look it over first, just to be safe. Standard practice. For a split second something shifted behind her eyes. Then she smiled and said, "Sure, no rush. Whenever I got around to it." She took the folder back and never mentioned it again. The next day I hired a forensic accountant named Roa out of Jacksonville. She was a CPA and a CFE with 20 years of experience handling fraud cases involving small and mid-sized contractors. I gave her the thumb drive, explained the setup, and told her I needed the full picture before I confronted anyone. Roa took 2 weeks. During that time, I decided to test Karen once. One morning over breakfast, casually, like it meant nothing, I mentioned the Pooler storage yard. I told her one of the guys had said we had material sitting in a lot off Pooler Parkway, and that I wanted to know what it was. Karen didn't flinch, not even a little. She set her coffee down and looked at me with this expression that was half annoyed, half amused. "That's overflow from the Savannah River Bridge job," she said. "We didn't have room at the shop. I told you about this in January." She hadn't told me anything in January. I would have remembered approving storage costs at some off-site yard. That's the kind of thing that sticks in your head when you run a business. But she said it with such calm, flat certainty that for about 3 seconds I actually wondered if maybe I had forgotten. Then she added, "I can pull the PO if you want, but honestly I've got payroll and the GPA invoice to finish today. Can it wait?" Translation: "Stop asking questions and let me handle it." I told her it could wait. I smiled. Then I went to work. She handled it all right. By the time I checked again the following week, the Pooler delivery records in our system had already been reclassified under a legitimate project code. She'd cleaned the trail. Not well enough for Roa, but well enough that a trusting husband probably would have never looked twice. What Roa eventually found was worse than what I had originally suspected. The fake vendor billings through Low Country Equipment Solutions totaled $48,000 over 7 months. But that was only one channel. Roa uncovered padded invoices from legitimate vendors where Karen had quietly inflated quantities and pocketed the difference. There were reimbursement claims for fuel purchases at gas stations nowhere near any of our job sites. There were padded payroll entries for 2 employees on dates when those men hadn't worked at all. The garnet overages alone, once you tracked where the extra material went and who sold it on the secondary market, added another $28,000. And on top of that, 3 client payments had been quietly rerouted to an account at a credit union in Hinesville that didn't belong to the company. That credit union account was in Sheldon Pratt's name. Roa laid everything out in a bound report, organized neatly with exhibits and documentation. When you added it all together, $211,000 had been siphoned out of Tidewater Protective Coatings over the previous 11 months through a coordinated scheme that required both financial access and operational knowledge. One person controlled the books. The other knew the work well enough to make fake invoices look legitimate. Karen and Shell. Together. Roa asked me if I wanted her to stop there. I told her to keep digging. She tracked down the registration for Low Country Equipment Solutions and eventually found the person listed as the registered agent. The name was Key Burmpton. Turned out she was Karen's cousin on her mother's side, a 23-year-old nursing student living in Statesboro who probably had no idea her name had been used to register a shell company. I sat there in Roa's office looking down at the report while something cold settled in my chest. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief either. It was something quieter than that. The kind of feeling you get when you suddenly understand exactly what's happening and realize with perfect clarity exactly what you're going to do about it. But I still wasn't finished learning the truth. Fraud has a way of making people sloppy. After a while, they get comfortable. That's usually when everything else starts coming out. I had a security camera installed in the office. Nothing complicated. Just standard coverage for the common area. I posted the notice like you're supposed to. Video only, no audio. That was all I needed. 3 days later, I was reviewing footage from a Thursday evening. Karen had stayed late at the office. She wasn't working. She was pacing near the filing cabinet, holding her phone, relaxed and laughing. I couldn't hear anything because there was no audio, but I didn't need to. That laugh wasn't meant for a vendor. The next morning, I was using the shared iPad to reset a vendor login for one of the company accounts. While I was doing that, a message preview popped up from Shell. One line was enough. He still has no idea about any of it. I almost feel bad. Almost. For days later, the camera caught Shell walking into the office at 9 o'clock at night. Karen was already there waiting. I watched the live feed on my phone from a motel room in Jessup. I had told Karen I was staying there overnight because I had an early morning tank inspection. For the first 20 minutes, they didn't do anything personal. They just went through files, moved papers around, printed some documents. Business stuff, fraud stuff. Then they were on each other. Right there on the desk, I had built myself out of reclaimed lumber from a demolished warehouse on River Street because I thought the wood had character. Before I closed the app, I rewound the video and paused on what they had been printing. I zoomed in on the pages sitting in the output tray. I couldn't read every word, but I could make out enough. It was the revised operating agreement, the same one Karen had brought to me 2 weeks earlier. The one with the adjusted buyout clause and the new banking authorizations. They had been refining it, working on version 2, probably tightening the language so it would hold up better if I pushed back again. These two weren't just cheating. They were building a case to take my company. I watched long enough to confirm everything I needed to confirm. Then I closed the app, set my phone down, and stared up at the ceiling of that motel room for 2 hours without moving. My mind kept replaying the past year. Every Saturday dinner, every handshake at the door, every quick look between them that I had ignored or dismissed. In my head, I rewrote all of it moment by moment. The affair had probably been going on at least as long as the financial scheme, maybe even longer. Shell had been coming to my house every weekend for the past year. Dinner on Saturdays, football on Sundays during the season. He'd sit at my table, eat the food Karen cooked, shake my hand when he left, and apparently come back later when I wasn't home. Karen didn't flinch. She set her coffee down slowly and looked at me, that expression on her face, half annoyed, half amused. That's overflow from the Savannah River Bridge job. We didn't have room at the shop. I told you about this in January. She hadn't told me anything in January. I would have remembered authorizing storage costs at an off-site location. But she said it with such flat certainty that, for about 3 seconds, I actually wondered if I'd forgotten. Then she added, I can pull the PO if you want, but honestly, I've got payroll and the GPA invoice to finish today. Can it wait? Translation. Stop asking questions and let me handle it. I told her it could wait, smiled, went to work. She handled it all right. By the time I checked the following week, the pooler delivery records in our system had been reclassified under a legitimate project code. She'd cleaned the trail. Not well enough for Roa, but well enough that a trusting husband would have never looked twice. What Roa found was worse than what I'd suspected. The fake vendor billings through Low Country Equipment Solutions totaled $48,000 over 7 months. But that was just one channel. Roa found padded invoices from legitimate vendors where Karen had inflated quantities and pocketed the difference. Reimbursement claims for fuel purchases at stations nowhere near our job sites. Padded payroll entries for 2 employees who hadn't worked on the dates listed. The garnet overages, when you tracked where the excess material actually went and who sold it on the secondary market, added another $28,000. And 3 client payments that had been rerouted to an account at a credit union in Hinesville that didn't belong to the company. The credit union account was in Sheldon Pratt's name. Roa laid everything out in a bound report with exhibits. $211,000 had been siphoned from Tidewater Protective Coatings over the past 11 months through a coordinated scheme that required both financial access and operational knowledge. One person handled the books. The other knew enough about our work to make the fake invoices look legitimate. Karen and Shell. Together. Roa asked if I wanted her to stop there. I told her to keep digging. She found the Low Country Equipment Solutions registration, tracked down Key Bermpton, Karen's cousin on her mother's side, a 23-year-old nursing student in Statesboro who probably had no idea her name was being used to register a shell company. I sat in Roa's office looking at the report and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage, not grief, something quieter. The feeling of understanding exactly what was happening and knowing exactly what I was going to do about it. But I wasn't done finding things out. Fraud makes people sloppy. They get comfortable. That's how the rest of it came out. I had a security camera installed in the office. Standard security coverage in a common area. Posted notice. Video only. No audio. That's all I needed. 3 days in, I reviewed footage from a Thursday evening. Karen had stayed late. She wasn't working. She was pacing near the filing cabinet. On the phone. Relaxed. Laughing. No audio, but I didn't need it. That laugh wasn't for a vendor. The next morning, I was on the shared iPad resetting a vendor login for the company accounts when a message preview popped up from Shell. One line was enough. He still has no idea about any of it. I almost feel bad. Almost. For days later, the camera caught Shell coming into the office at 9 p.m. Karen was already there. I watched the feed on my phone from a motel room in Jessup where I told Karen I was staying for an early morning tank inspection. They didn't do anything for the first 20 minutes. Just went through files, moved papers around, printed something. Business stuff. Fraud stuff. Then they were on each other right there on the desk I'd built out of reclaimed lumber from a demolished warehouse on River Street because I thought it had character. Before I closed the app, I rewound and paused on what they had been printing. Zoomed in on the pages sitting in the output tray. Couldn't read every word, but I could make out enough. It was the revised operating agreement. The same one Karen had brought me 2 weeks earlier with the adjusted buyout clause and the banking authorizations. They'd been refining it, working on version 2, probably with language that would hold up better if I pushed back again. These 2 weren't just cheating. They were building a case to take my company. I watched long enough to confirm what I needed to confirm. Then I closed the app, set the phone down, and stared at the ceiling of the motel room for 2 hours without moving. My brain went back through every Saturday dinner, every handshake at the door, every look between them I'd dismissed, rewrote all of it, every single moment. The affair had been going on at least as long as the financial scheme, maybe longer. Shell had been to my house every weekend for the past year. Dinner on Saturdays. Football on Sundays during the season. He'd sit at my table, eat food Karen cooked, shake my hand when he left, and then apparently come back when I wasn't home. I spent the next week building my case. Downloaded every piece of footage. Backed up Roa's financial report to 3 separate locations. Met with an attorney named Juan Gatch, a litigation guy out of Savannah who specialized in business disputes and LLC dissolutions. Juan reviewed everything, asked pointed questions, and laid out my options with the kind of calm precision I needed. During that same week, I caught something else. One of my foremen, a solid guy named Tully who'd been with us 4 years, mentioned that Karen had called the Port Authority project manager directly to reschedule our crane maintenance window. She told the PM that I was overextended and that she and Shell would be handling the coordination going forward. I called the PM myself. Casual. Friendly. He confirmed it. Said Karen had been professional. Said I was slammed with bids and that Shell would be the primary point of contact for the next quarter. The PM didn't think anything of it. Just internal reshuffling. It wasn't reshuffling. It was positioning. She was moving me out of my own client relationships so that when the time came to cut me loose, the clients would already be used to dealing with Shell and Karen. Smooth transition. Minimal disruption. Like I was the one being phased out of the company I built. I thanked the PM, told him I'd be handling things personally going forward, and made a note for Want's file. Then Karen told me she was pregnant. She did it over dinner on a Wednesday. Grilled shrimp, rice, the works. She was smiling in this careful, practiced way. Told me she'd been to the doctor that morning. 8 weeks along. I did the math before my fork hit the plate. 8 weeks put conception right around the time I was in Wayross for a 5-day pipeline job. I'd been gone Monday through Friday. Karen had told me she was sick that whole week. Stayed home from the office. Barely texted. She wasn't sick. She was with Shell. I looked at her across the table and smiled. Told her that was great news. Hugged her. Said all the things a man says when he thinks he's about to be a father. I wasn't about to be a father. But I needed her comfortable and unsuspecting for what came next. There was one more thing I needed before I could move. I went to a walk-in clinic the following morning and got a full STI panel. Came back clean, which was the only piece of luck I'd had in months. Juan Gatch and I met twice more that week. Laid out every step. Filed nothing yet. Signed nothing yet. Just prepared. Like rigging containment before you start blasting. You don't fire the nozzle until every seal is tight and every vent is in place. Otherwise the dust goes everywhere and you lose control. I wasn't going to lose control. 2 weeks after Karen's announcement, on a Saturday, I told my mother. I drove out to her place in Taun, the same cinder block ranch house I'd grown up in after my dad left when I was 6. She'd raised me alone, working the register at a feed store for 20-odd years. Never remarried. Never complained. She was on the porch when I pulled up, sweet tea on the side table. She looked happy to see me, which made what I was about to say harder. I sat down and told her everything. The fraud, the affair, the pregnancy that wasn't mine. Showed her the financial report. Showed her the dates that proved the baby couldn't be mine. Didn't show her the video. She didn't need to see that. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. The fan kept spinning. Somewhere down the road, a dog was barking. Then she said, "How far along is she?" I told her, 10 weeks. She nodded, folded her hands in her lap, looked out at the yard. "I've been waiting for you to have a child. You know that. I've waited years." I said, "I know. So here's what I think," she said. "Forget the DNA. Forget who did what. Raise the baby as yours. Let me be a grandmother. That's what matters here. Not who slept with who." I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, "Are you serious? I'm not raising that kid. Don't ask me again." She didn't stop. She leaned forward in her chair and said it wasn't about me. Said it was about family. Said a child doesn't choose how it comes into the world. And neither should I punish an innocent baby because 2 adults did something wrong. Said she'd help. Said she'd be there every day if I needed her. Said the baby deserved better than what Karen and Shell could give it. And that I was the kind of man who could step up even when things weren't fair. I stood up. Didn't yell. Didn't argue further. There was nothing left to discuss. She called after me from the porch. I heard her voice crack. Heard the chair scrape as she stood up. I drove away. 45 minutes back to Isle of Hope on back roads. I didn't turn the radio on. Pulled into my driveway. Went inside, opened the hall closet, and took down every framed photo of my mother that hung in the house. 4 of them. Put them in a cardboard box, taped it shut, and set it in the garage next to the recycling. Over the next 2 days, she called 9 times, texted paragraphs, apologized, then doubled down, said she didn't mean it the way it sounded, then said she did mean it and I was being selfish, then cried and said she was scared of being alone. I read every message. Responded to none. On the 3rd day, I called the utility company and canceled the autopay I'd been running for her electric bill for the past 7 years. Called her cell carrier and removed her from my family plan. Stopped the monthly transfer I'd been sending to help cover her rent since she retired. She noticed within a week. Called me 14 times in one day. I didn't pick up. She drove to my house. I wasn't there. She went to the office. Karen told her I was on a job site. That was the last time I initiated or received any communication from my mother. I executed everything in 1 week, Monday through Friday. Planned it like a shutdown project. Every step sequenced, every contingency mapped. Monday morning, Juan Gatch filed an ex parte emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, freezing all Tidewater business accounts pending a forensic audit. The motion argued immediate risk of asset dissipation given that 2 individuals with direct account access were actively siphoning funds and had already demonstrated a pattern of covering their tracks. It included Roa's report, bank records, the fake vendor documentation, and an affidavit from Dale at the garnet supplier confirming delivery discrepancies. The motion also sought injunctive relief, granting me temporary sole operational control of the LLC and barring Karen and Shell from the premises pending a full hearing. The judge signed the emergency TTRO before lunch. Hearing set in 10 days, but that was all the time I needed. Monday afternoon, I walked into the office where Karen was processing invoices and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal notice of termination from Tidewater Protective Coatings LLC, effective immediately, along with a demand letter for restitution of all misappropriated funds. She opened it, read the first page, and her face went white. Then she flipped to the second page, the one with Roa's summary figures attached, and I watched her eyes track to the Low Country Equipment Solutions line item. That was when she knew exactly how much I knew. 2 of my crew guys were in the shop bay 20 feet away, loading the spray rig for a Tuesday job. They stopped what they were doing, watched through the open door. Nobody said a word. She started talking. I walked out. Nothing she had to say would change anything. And I'd learned months ago that her voice was just a tool she used to manage people. Tuesday morning, a locksmith hit the shop at 6 a.m. New deadbolts on every door. New codes on the alarm system, court order in hand, every bit of it legal. Then one filed a civil suit against Sheldon Pratt for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conversion, and unjust enrichment, including a civil RICO claim seeking treble damages and attorney fees. The suit sought dissolution of the LLC, full accounting of all diverted funds, and forfeiture of Shell's member interest. Shell was served at the duplex by a process server at 7:15 a.m. I know because one confirmed it by 7:30. Shell called me 11 times that day. I didn't answer. He showed up at the shop around 2 p.m. The locks I'd changed that morning kept him out. Shell stood in the parking lot pulling on a door that wouldn't open, and I watched from inside through the window blinds. The same parking lot where we'd shaken hands years ago and said, "Let's build something." He saw me watching, started yelling, pounding on the glass. I turned around and went back to the bid I was working on for a water tower record in Effingham County. Eventually, he left. Wednesday, I filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences, but the filing included a detailed exhibit of the affair evidence and financial fraud as grounds for equitable distribution in my favor. Georgia is a no-fault state, but judges still consider misconduct when dividing assets. One made sure every exhibit was clean, documented, and devastating. That same morning, I had the house locks changed. New deadbolt on the front door, new code on the garage. Juan had advised securing the residence the same day as the filing, and the timing was deliberate. Wednesday evening, Karen showed up at the house. I'd expected this. She stood in the driveway and tried the front door, which wouldn't budge. She knocked, then pounded, then called my name through the door. When I didn't answer, she sat on the porch steps for an hour. I watched from the back of the house through a window facing the driveway, the same way I'd watched Shell at the shop. She wasn't crying. A woman caught cheating would cry. A woman caught stealing would panic. Karen was doing neither. She was sitting there, thinking, running scenarios, calculating her next move. She finally left. The divorce papers were waiting at her friend's address the next morning. Thursday, Roa's report was formally submitted as a criminal referral to the Chatham County DA's office. Theft by deception, identity fraud for using Kayleigh Brumpton's name without consent, and theft by conversion. One didn't promise charges would be filed, but he said the case was clean enough that a prosecutor would at least look at it seriously. Friday, I met with every active client Tidewater had, in person where possible, by phone where not, explained there had been internal financial irregularities, that my business partner was no longer with the company, and that all existing contracts would be honored by me personally with no interruption in service. I brought the Port Authority project manager a folder showing the audit trail and our corrective action. He shook my hand and said he appreciated the transparency. Not one client left. Every single contract stayed. That Friday was also the day Karen played her last card. She had her attorney contact Juan with what amounted to a threat dressed up in legal language. Karen was pregnant. She would be claiming the child was mine unless I agreed to a more favorable divorce settlement. She wanted the house, 60% of the business value, and 18 months of spousal support. In exchange, she wouldn't pursue a paternity claim that would at minimum create a legal presumption of fatherhood and tie me to child support for 18 years. One called me, read me the letter, asked how I wanted to respond. I told him to respond with 3 things. First, I wasn't signing the birth certificate or any paperwork that could be twisted into acceptance. Juan would file to contest paternity and request court-ordered DNA testing immediately after the birth. Second, any attempt to fraudulently establish paternity would be met with a countersuit for fraud. Third, I had time-stamped evidence proving I was over 100 miles away during the week of conception, along with the affair footage establishing the actual father's identity. Karen's attorney withdrew the threat within 48 hours. The leverage she thought she had evaporated the moment she realized I'd been documenting everything. Not just the money, but the timeline, the travel records, the hotel receipts from Wayross, all of it. By Friday evening, Shell had no business, no income, no access to any accounts, a civil suit demanding repayment of over $200,000 plus treble damages, and a potential criminal investigation. Karen had no job, no access to the books she'd used to steal from me, a divorce filing that painted her as a co-conspirator in financial fraud, and a pregnancy she could no longer use as leverage. I went home Friday night, sat on my dock, and watched the tide come in across the marsh. First quiet evening I'd had in months. The next several months played out like gravity doing its job. The divorce moved fast on temporary orders. The judge entered interim rulings within weeks, granting me exclusive possession of the house, sole control of the business, and freezing joint accounts pending final resolution. Karen's attorney tried to argue she was entitled to half the business value and spousal support given her pregnancy. One countered with the fraud documentation, showing she'd already extracted well over $100,000 from the company illegally. The judge was not sympathetic to Karen's position on the temporary orders and set the final hearing for after the birth, so the paternity question could be resolved. Karen had the baby a few months later, a boy. He was born with a serious congenital heart issue that meant early surgery and ongoing specialist care, the kind of thing that eats money and requires stability she didn't have. Within days of the birth, Juan filed for court-ordered paternity testing. I hadn't signed the birth certificate or any paperwork that could create a presumption. The test confirmed what I already knew. The baby wasn't mine. Shell was the father. With the test results in hand, the court entered an order removing any presumption of my legal responsibility for the child. One made sure that paperwork was airtight. The final divorce decree came down shortly after the paternity results were filed. I kept the house, the business, and 80% of joint assets. She got her car and personal belongings. No alimony. The judge cited her documented role in the financial fraud as a significant factor in the asset distribution. She delivered at Memorial in Savannah alone. Shell wasn't there. My mother wasn't there. Her cousin Keely, the one whose identity she'd used to register the Shell company, had cut her off completely after the fraud came to light. The civil suit against Shell took longer. His attorney tried to argue that the operating agreement was ambiguous about fiduciary duties and that some of the transactions were legitimate. But our operating agreement, the original one I'd insisted on when we formed the LLC, had an explicit clause requiring mutual written consent for any vendor relationship exceeding $10,000 annually and prohibiting either member from holding undisclosed financial interests in any company doing business with Tidewater. Shell had violated both provisions repeatedly. ROA's forensic report dismantled every remaining argument. The Shell company, the fake invoices, the rerouted payments, everything was documented down to the penny. Shell settled before trial for the full restitution amount plus $60,000 in damages. He didn't have the cash. He signed over his truck, his boat, his savings, and agreed to a 5-year payment plan on the remainder. Juan attached a lien to the settlement agreement to protect our position. The DA's office declined to prosecute. Not enough resources for the case size, they said. Juan wasn't surprised. Criminal charges in financial fraud cases against individuals were always a long shot without a motivated prosecutor. But the civil judgment was on public record, and in this industry that's a death sentence. I restructured Tidewater as a single-member LLC, hired a new bookkeeper, a retired Navy chief named Odell, who'd spent 20 years managing supply logistics on destroyers and didn't have a creative bone in his body. Perfect. I wanted boring, competent, and honest. Odell was all three. I also hired a full-time office administrator named Priya to handle scheduling and client communications. Kept the same field crews. The guys who worked for me knew something had gone down, but they were blue-collar guys who understood that personal business stays personal. Nobody asked questions. Everybody showed up on time. Business actually improved after the split. Without Shell skimming and Karen padding invoices, our actual margins were better than I'd realized. I bid more aggressively on 3 new contracts and won all of them, landed a maintenance agreement with a paper mill in Rincon, picked up a 5-year bridge coating program with the county. Revenue climbed past $3.5 million. Shell's life went the other direction. 3 years out now. I'm 40. Tidewater is running clean and profitable. 12 full-time employees, 2 spray rigs, house paid off, business debt-free. I'm pricing out a new blast rig that would let us take on offshore platform work. I met a woman named Josette 8 months after the divorce was final. She's a marine surveyor who works with cargo insurers. We've been together for 2 years now, living in the Isle of Hope house, which I kept, which has no trace of Karen left in it. My mother is still alive as far as I know. She's tried reaching me a few times over the years. Letters returned, messages shut down. Left one voicemail on an old number saying she was sorry. I believe her. Doesn't change what she asked me to do. Shell reached out once about a year ago, a handwritten letter to the office. I didn't open it. Put it through the shredder the same way I'd shred a junk mail flyer. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Dale had never called about the Garnet volumes. How long it would have gone on, how much more they would have taken. Doesn't matter. He called. I listened. I moved. Guys, we are so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. It really helps us reach that 1,000 mark.